The most powerful telepaths in the galaxy made contact with Earth on a Tuesday. By Wednesday, 3 of them were in psychiatric care. The Velhari Communion had read minds across 10,000 species. They'd touched consciousness in forms humans couldn't imagine. Crystal entities that thought in geometric patterns, hive minds spanning entire planets, ancient beings whose thoughts moved slower than continental drift. None of it prepared them for humans. The first telepath who touched a human mind started screaming. She didn't stop for 6 hours. When she finally went quiet, she could only whisper 3 words over and over. Too many voices. The second telepath locked himself in a meditation chamber. He's still there. He rocks back and forth, muttering about something called the Macarena, and why anyone would voluntarily put that in their head. The third telepath filed an official complaint with the Galactic Council. The document was 47 pages long. Most of it was just the word "Y" repeated in different fonts and increasingly frantic punctuation. The Council's response? Send more telepaths. Surely it was a fluke. An isolated incident. Maybe they'd just picked unstable humans. There had to be a rational explanation. There wasn't. Within a month, the Velhari Communion had burned through 23 of their finest mind readers. Each one came back changed, traumatized. Some developed nervous tics. Others couldn't sleep without medication. One refused to eat anything that wasn't perfectly symmetrical because she'd touched the mind of a human with OCD. Now she understood why. The humans, meanwhile, were completely fine. They had no idea what they'd done. That's what made it worse. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session. The question wasn't whether to continue contact with Earth. It was whether the Velhari Communion could survive it. They formed a committee, created new protocols, developed safety measures for telepathic contact. They brought in therapists, linguists, xenopsychologists who specialized in hazardous cognition. They wrote a report. The official title was Comprehensive Analysis of Human Cognitive Patterns and Their Impact on Telepathic Species. Unofficially, it was called the Sanity Document. It became the most downloaded file in Galactic Council history. This is the story of what happened when the galaxy's most advanced mind readers discovered that the scariest thing in the universe isn't what humans do. It's how they think. The Velhari Communion ruled galactic diplomacy for 3,000 years. Not through force, through understanding. When words failed, they listened to thoughts. When languages couldn't translate, they read intentions directly. Conflicts that would have sparked wars were resolved in minutes. Trade disputes dissolved when both sides truly understood each other's needs. They were the galaxy's peace brokers, its therapists, its ultimate arbiters of truth. Because you can't lie to a telepath. The Velhari themselves were a delicate species. Tall, translucent skin that shifted colors with their emotions. 4 arms that moved in perfect synchronization. They communicated through a blend of telepathy and bioluminescence. Speaking aloud was considered crude, primitive. Why use words when you could share pure meaning? Their homeworld, Velhara, was a place of absolute mental harmony. No conflict, no misunderstanding. Every citizen's thoughts flowed together like a symphony. They called it the Communion for a reason. The Velhari had strict breeding protocols, genetic screening, psychological testing. Only the most mentally stable individuals were allowed to reproduce. They'd spent millennia cultivating perfect minds. Clean minds. Organized minds. And then they met humanity. The Galactic Council had been monitoring Earth for decades. Standard procedure for pre-contact civilizations. They watched humanity's development with detached interest. Nothing special. Another aggressive species tearing up their own planet, but they'd achieved faster-than-light communication. That meant contact was mandatory. The Council assigned the Velhari to handle first contact. They always did. The Velhari would read human intentions, assess their psychological state, determine if they were ready for galactic society. It should have been routine. The Velhari sent their best, Advocate Zara. She'd conducted first contact with over 300 species. She could read a mind from orbit if she focused hard enough. Her skills were legendary. She volunteered for Earth. "I've touched consciousnesses you couldn't fathom," she told the council. "I've read minds that exist in 17 dimensions. I've communed with entities older than your sons." She was confident, experienced, prepared for anything. The council approved the mission. Zara's team consisted of 5 telepaths, all elite. They approached Earth with the same protocols they'd used 1,000 times before. Cloak their ship, identify targets, establish telepathic contact. Simple. They selected their first subject carefully. Ambassador Richard Torres, a diplomat, someone trained in communication, someone whose mind would be organized, disciplined, professional, someone safe. Zara extended her consciousness toward him. Her teammates watched the biometric readouts. Everything looked normal. Ambassador Torres was sitting in his office, reviewing documents, calm, focused, perfect conditions. Zara made contact. What happened next would change galactic history. Zara's consciousness touched Ambassador Torres's mind at 2:47 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. She lasted 11 seconds. The first 3 seconds were normal. She sensed his surface thoughts. He was reading a diplomatic brief about agricultural trade agreements. His mind was processing the information methodically. Then she went deeper. The organized surface shattered like glass. Underneath, his mind was screaming, not in distress, not in fear, just screaming. A constant background roar of competing thoughts, memories, sensations, all firing simultaneously. He was reading the document, but also remembering a conversation from breakfast and worrying about his daughter's math test and replaying an embarrassing moment from 15 years ago and thinking about lunch and noticing an itch on his ankle and remembering the lyrics to a song and planning his evening and regretting something he said yesterday, all at once, all the time. And he considered this normal. Zara tried to pull back. But human minds don't work like other species. There's no central consciousness to disconnect from. His thoughts grabbed her, not intentionally, just by existing. She went deeper, layer after layer of chaos. His visual cortex was processing the words on the page, but also generating random images. A purple elephant, his grandmother's house, a beach he'd never been to. These images meant nothing. They served no purpose. His brain just made them. For fun. His auditory processing was worse. He was humming, inside his mind, a song called "Don't Stop Believin' that had been stuck in his head for 3 days. He didn't even like the song. His brain was torturing him with it, and he just accepted it. Zara found his emotional center. It was processing 17 different feelings simultaneously. He was mildly anxious about work, slightly happy about coffee, vaguely guilty about not calling his mother, nostalgic about nothing in particular, annoyed at the temperature, satisfied with his choice of shoes. His emotional state was a contradiction, and somehow stable. Then she found his internal monologue. Every species has some form of internal thought. But humans had conversations with themselves, constantly. Ambassador Torres was arguing with himself about whether to have chicken or fish for dinner. Both sides of the argument were him. He was debating himself, disagreeing with himself, winning and losing simultaneously. This was normal for him. Zara's teammates saw her vital signs spike. They tried to sever the connection. Too late. She'd found his memories. They weren't organized chronologically, or by importance. They were just everywhere. A random memory from childhood next to what he ate yesterday, next to a fictional scenario he'd imagined, next to actual history, mixed with movies he'd seen, mixed with dreams he'd had. He couldn't tell which was which without checking. His brain stored lies, truths, imagination, and reality in the same place. And that still wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that underneath all of it, deeper than the chaos, beneath the screaming tornado of consciousness, Ambassador Torres had another voice. The monkey brain, ancient, primitive, still living in caves and running from predators. It screamed different warnings. Danger everywhere. Don't trust anyone. Eat all the food now. Reproduce immediately. That shadow might be a tiger. And the modern human brain just ignored it, mostly, while simultaneously listening to it, while arguing with it, while letting it influence decisions. Ambassador Torres was 3 different consciousness, pretending to be one, and the pretending was so convincing he believed it. Zara started screaming. Her teammates pulled her out, severed the connection, stabilized her vitals. She kept screaming. When she finally stopped, her first words were, "He wasn't even stressed. That was his mind at rest." The team looked at the readouts. Ambassador Torres's heart rate hadn't changed. His stress hormones were normal. His brain activity was baseline. For a human, that chaos was his default state. One of Zara's teammates made a decision. "We need more data. I'll make contact." His name was Keller, youngest member of the team, brilliant, ambitious. He lasted 8 seconds. The Velhari sent their findings to the Council immediately. The Council sent them back. "Impossible," they said. "No species could function like this. Your telepaths made errors. Try again." So they tried again, and again, and again. Each attempt ended the same way. Traumatized telepaths, confused humans, increasingly desperate reports. The Council finally sent their own team. Independent verification. Maybe the Velhari had gone soft. Those telepaths came back worse. One developed a stutter. In 3 languages, including binary, one became obsessed with human music, specifically something called death metal. She said it was the only thing that matched the inside of a human mind. One filed for early retirement. He was only 70 years old. His species lived for 400 years. The Council couldn't ignore it anymore. They assembled the greatest minds in the galaxy. Xenopsychologists, neuroscientists, philosophers, telepaths from 17 different species. Their mission: figure out why human minds break telepaths. The research took 6 months. The conclusions were terrifying. Problem 1. Humans think in chaos. Every other species in the galaxy evolved mental organization, clean thought patterns, linear processing. When a Velhari thinks about breakfast, they think about breakfast. When a Zorgon plans their day, they plan their day. Humans think about 17 things simultaneously, and none of them connect. This isn't a bug. It's a feature. Human brains evolved to monitor threats while hunting, while socializing, while remembering where they left food. Survival required constant multitasking, so their brains learned to process everything at once. They never turned it off. Problem 2. The internal monologue. Most species think in abstract concepts, pure meaning. When a Velhari is angry, they simply experience anger. Humans narrate their anger to themselves. They have full conversations about being angry. They analyze their anger, judge their anger, feel guilty about their anger, get angry about being guilty. It's recursive. They think about thinking, have feelings about feelings, form opinions about their opinions. They're trapped in infinite loops of self-awareness, and they think everyone does this. Problem 3. The lies. Humans lie to themselves constantly. They're not even aware they're doing it. They'll believe one thing and do another. Say they want something while actively avoiding it. Claim they're fine while falling apart. convince themselves they're logical while making emotional decisions. Their brains actively hide information from themselves. For protection, a human can experience trauma and forget it, store it somewhere inaccessible. Their own brain betrays them for their own good. When a telepath reads a human mind, they can't tell what's real, because the human doesn't know either. Problem 4. The voices. Every human has multiple personalities. They don't call it that, but they do. Work self, home self, friend self, parent self, child self. Each one acts differently, thinks differently, makes different decisions, and they're all running simultaneously. A human can be confident and insecure at the same time, brave and terrified, kind and cruel, not switching between states, existing in both states. Their minds are contradictions that somehow function. Problem 5. The creativity. This was the part that truly baffled the researchers. Humans imagine things that don't exist for no reason. They create fictional scenarios. Daydream. Fantasize. They populate their minds with people who never existed, places they've never been, conversations that never happened, and they enjoy it. Their brains actively generate chaos. On purpose. For entertainment. A human can be bored and entertain themselves by imagining what would happen if everyone suddenly turned into penguins. They do this voluntarily. Problem 6. The baseline. The final problem was the simplest and the worst. Everything described above? That's a healthy human mind. That chaos is normal, expected, functional. When a human's mind becomes organized, quiet, linear, that's when something's wrong. That's depression, medication, damage. The telepaths weren't reading broken minds. They were reading minds working exactly as designed. One researcher summarized it perfectly. Humans evolved consciousness that's too powerful for their own good. Their brains generate more thoughts than they can process, more emotions than they can feel, more scenarios than they can consider, so they just let it all run at once. And somehow, impossibly, they function. The report concluded with a single recommendation. Human minds should be classified as a telepathic hazard, Class 7, contact only with extensive safety protocols and psychological support. The Council approved it unanimously. Then they got requests from 200 telepaths volunteering to try anyway. The Velhari Communion established the first telepathic recovery center 3 weeks after initial contact. They needed it. 23 telepaths required immediate treatment. 50 more were showing delayed symptoms. The waiting list grew daily. Dr. Mayren Vastos ran the program. She was human, a psychologist who'd volunteered when she learned about the situation. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Humans were treating aliens traumatized by human minds. Her first patient was Jara, the advocate who'd made initial contact. She sat in the therapy room, all 4 arms wrapped around herself. Her skin flickered between gray and dark blue. Stress colors. "Tell me what you experienced," Dr. Vastos said gently. Jara's voice was barely a whisper. "Noise. Constant noise. Like standing in a storm where every raindrop is a different thought. I couldn't find the center. Couldn't find the self." "That's because there isn't one," Dr. Vastos explained. "Not the way you're looking for. Humans don't have a central consciousness. We're more like a committee that votes on everything. But how do you function? How do you make decisions?" "We don't know. We just do." Jara's skin flashed red. "That's not an answer." "I know. Welcome to being human." The therapy sessions were difficult. Dr. Vastos had to explain concepts that humans took for granted, things that seemed obvious, but weren't, like intrusive thoughts. Keller, the young telepath, couldn't understand them. He was thinking about pushing someone in front of a train, while having a pleasant conversation. Why? His brain generated the thought randomly. He didn't want to do it. He was actually horrified by the thought. But his brain made him think it anyway. Why? Nobody knows. Brains are weird. Or the concept of shower thoughts. Random philosophical revelations that occurred during mundane activities. She was washing her hair and suddenly questioned the nature of reality, one telepath reported. It wasn't prompted by anything. Her brain just decided to have an existential crisis at 7 a.m. Yeah, that happens, Dr. Vastos confirmed. The telepaths struggled with human memory especially. The fact that humans remembered things that never happened. That every time they recalled a memory, they changed it slightly. That nostalgia was literally their brains lying to them about how good the past was. How do you know what's true? They asked. We don't, not really. We just go with it. This answer never satisfied them. Dr. Vastos developed new therapeutic techniques, cognitive exercises to help telepaths process chaos without panicking, meditation practices that accepted disorder instead of fighting it, support groups where telepaths could share their experiences. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source, Advocate Fenris. He'd touched a human mind and survived relatively intact. He'd only needed 3 therapy sessions. What did you do differently? Dr. Vastos asked. I stopped trying to understand, Fenris said. I stopped looking for logic. I just experienced it, like listening to music. You don't analyze every note. You feel the whole song. Dr. Vastos smiled. That's actually perfect. That's exactly what humans do. She incorporated this into treatment, taught telepaths to approach human minds like art instead of puzzles, to accept contradiction instead of resolving it, to find beauty in chaos instead of fearing it. It worked, mostly. Some telepaths recovered completely. They developed techniques for reading human minds safely, learned to skim the surface instead of diving deep, found ways to translate the chaos into something comprehensible. Others never recovered. They retired from telepathic work entirely. Some developed anxiety around all mental contact. A few became obsessed with humanity, studying human psychology obsessively, trying to understand the unknowable. One telepath, Cirrus, had the strangest reaction. After touching a human mind, he developed a sense of humor. His species didn't have humor. They found it biologically impossible to understand why something would be funny. But Cirrus got it now. He understood irony, sarcasm, puns. He started making jokes, bad jokes. His colleagues were disturbed. I think I'm broken, he told Dr. Vastos. No, she said. I think you're just a little bit human now. He wasn't sure if that was good or bad. Neither was she. The therapy program expanded. The council funded it permanently. They knew more telepaths would need it. Contact with humanity was inevitable. Someone had to be ready. Dr. Vastos wrote a manual. Surviving Human Consciousness, a guide for telepaths. It became required reading across the galaxy. Chapter titles included, Yes, They're Always Like This. The Voices Are Normal. Why do they remember song lyrics but not important information? And what do you mean they argue with themselves? It sold 30 million copies. The bestseller list had a human book at number 1. The irony wasn't lost on Dr. Vastos. The Galactic Council faced a new problem. They couldn't avoid humans anymore. Earth had faster-than-light capability. They'd be expanding soon. Contact was mandatory. But telepaths couldn't read human minds safely. Normal translation protocols failed. Human languages were too contextual, too layered, too deliberately confusing. They needed a new solution. They needed human translators. Enter Project Babel, an initiative to train humans as diplomatic translators between their species and telepathic aliens. The project head was Ambassador Maria Okonkwo. She'd worked in international relations for 20 years. She spoke 7 languages. She understood cultural nuance. She thought she was prepared. She wasn't. The first training session was a disaster. Ambassador Okonkwo was paired with Velhari advocate Jiren. Simple exercise. Jiren would share a thought telepathically. Okonkwo would translate it into words for other humans. Jiren shared the concept of morning. Greeting. Simple. Universal. Every species had morning greetings. Okonkwo's translation took 5 minutes and 3 different attempts. He's saying good morning, but also acknowledging your existence, but also confirming that you survived the night, but also expressing subtle dominance by greeting first, but also asking permission to share space, but also... It's complicated. Jiren's skin flashed confusion. I only meant good morning. Yeah, but in which context? Are you my equal, my superior, a stranger, a friend? Are we in public or private? Is this formal or casual? What time is it? What happened yesterday? All of that changes what good morning means. Jiren stared at her. You people are exhausting. Tell me about it. The project quickly discovered the core problem. Telepathic species communicated in pure meaning, direct, unambiguous. What they thought was what they shared. Humans communicated in layers. Layer 1. What we say, the surface level, the actual words, seemed simple. It wasn't. Human languages were filled with idioms, slang, regional variations, cultural references, and context-dependent meanings. The same phrase could mean completely different things. That's interesting could mean, that is interesting. I hate this. I'm being polite. I'm judging you. I'm bored. You're wrong. Tell me more. Please stop talking, all from tone and context. Telepaths couldn't process this. They heard the words and thought they understood. They didn't. Layer 2. What we mean. The subtext, the implied meaning, what humans actually wanted to communicate. This was worse. Humans rarely said what they meant directly. They hinted, implied, suggested, used passive voice, buried the point under pleasantries. A human saying, we should grab coffee sometime, didn't mean they wanted coffee. It meant they liked you but weren't ready to commit to concrete plans. A human saying, I'll think about it, meant no. A human saying, bless your heart, meant, well, it depended on the region, but probably not a blessing. Layer 3. What we feel, the emotional subtext, the feelings underneath the words and meaning. The layer most humans weren't even consciously aware of. A human could say, I'm fine, while meaning I'm not fine, while feeling 17 different emotions, including anger, sadness, guilt, and hunger. All simultaneously. All relevant. The translation program evolved. They couldn't just translate words. They needed context specialists, cultural experts, emotional interpreters. They needed teams. Standard human-to-alien communication required 3 translators minimum. Translator 1. Linguistic, they handled the actual words. Converted human languages into Galactic standard, explained idioms, clarified slang, provided regional context. They also explained why humans had 16 words for said and used them interchangeably. Why they created new words constantly. Why they turned nouns into verbs for fun. Translator 2. Cultural. They explained the context. Why humans laughed at funerals. Why they gave gifts that required specific responses. Why they asked, how are you, but didn't want real answers. They also explained sarcasm, irony, humor, references to things that happened 50 years ago, inside jokes that weren't inside anymore, but humans used anyway. Translator 3. Emotional. They read human body language, tone, micro-expressions, energy in the room, things humans communicated without words. They explained why a human saying whatever while shrugging meant anger, why smiling didn't always mean happy, why silence sometimes meant more than speaking. This position was the hardest because humans didn't always know their own emotions. The first official human-alien negotiation used this 3-layer system. It took 6 hours to discuss a simple trade agreement, 30 minutes of actual talking, 5.5 hours of translation and clarification. One exchange took 45 minutes. Human diplomat: we'd be happy to consider your proposal. Linguistic translator: they said they'd be happy to consider your proposal. Alien: excellent, they agree. Cultural translator: no, wait. Happy to consider means they're being polite. It's not an agreement. It's not even interest. It's acknowledging that they heard you. Alien: but they said happy. Emotional translator: her heart rate increased when you made the offer. Her cortisol levels spiked. She's stressed, possibly threatened. The happy is protective language. Alien: so they disagree? Linguistic translator: not exactly. They're leaving room for negotiation while not committing to anything, while not offending you, while maintaining diplomatic flexibility. Alien: why not just say that? Cultural translator: because that would be rude. The aliens were baffled. The humans were just relieved someone finally understood them. Ambassador Okonkwo wrote the training manual for human translators. She opened with a warning. If you think translating between human languages is hard, wait until you try translating human consciousness into telepathic meaning. You'll need therapy. We provide it. The manual was 1,000 pages long. Chapter 1 was titled, Humans Don't Mean What They Say, Don't Say What They Mean, and Aren't Sure What They Feel. It didn't get less complicated from there. The Galactic Council requested a formal report. They needed to know if humans were safe to integrate into galactic society, not physically safe. They'd already assessed human aggression levels, mentally safe. Were human minds stable enough for regular contact? Could they coexist with telepathic species? Were they dangerous? The Council appointed a committee, xenopsychologists from 30 different species. They'd evaluate human mental health by galactic standards. The committee was led by Dr. Zelis Vaughan, a crystalline. His species processed information through quantum consciousness. He'd evaluated over 4,000 civilizations. He was thorough, professional, objective. His preliminary report was leaked to the press. It started with a single sentence. By galactic standards, every human should be institutionalized. The galaxy panicked. The full report came out 3 days later. 200 pages of psychological analysis, cognitive testing, neurological scans, behavioral observations. The conclusions were damning and fascinating. Mental health by galactic standards. The committee evaluated humans against standard galactic mental health criteria. The results were clear. 98% of humans would be classified as having at least one mental disorder by galactic standards. Anxiety disorders, intrusive thoughts, emotional dysregulation, obsessive tendencies, compulsive behaviors, dissociative patterns, identity confusion, all normal for humans. The voice problem. Every species in the galaxy had singular consciousness, one voice, one perspective, one self. Humans had multiple voices, competing narratives, different selves depending on context. By galactic standards, this was textbook dissociative identity disorder. By human standards, this was having a personality. The memory issues. Galactic species had reliable memory. What they remembered happened. What happened, they remembered. Human memory was creative fiction. They misremembered constantly, changed memories every time they accessed them, fabricated entire events, deleted traumatic experiences. This should have been classified as severe cognitive impairment. Instead, it was evolutionary advantage. Humans could rewrite their own trauma, edit their emotional responses, choose which version of themselves to believe. The emotional chaos. Standard galactic emotional processing. Feel emotion. Process emotion. Move forward. Human emotional processing. Feel 17 emotions. Feel guilty about feeling emotions. Analyze why you're feeling emotions. Have emotions about your analysis. Suppress emotions. Express wrong emotions. Convince yourself you're not feeling anything. Break down 3 days later. This was considered healthy emotional management. The existential problem. Most species accepted their existence without question. They existed, therefore they were. Simple. Humans questioned their own existence. Regularly, they created entire philosophical frameworks around whether they were real, whether reality was real, whether anything meant anything. They did this voluntarily, for fun. A significant percentage of humans experienced existential crises. They questioned their purpose, their meaning, their value, and then they just kept going. They decided meaning was whatever they wanted it to be. They created purpose from nothing. This shouldn't work. It did anyway. The stress response. Galactic species experienced stress in dangerous situations. Appropriate response to actual threats. Humans experience stress about everything. Work, social interactions, their own thoughts, things that might happen, things that happened years ago, things they imagined. Their bodies couldn't tell the difference between a real threat and worrying about an email they sent. They lived in constant, low-level fight-or-flight mode for decades and just considered it normal adult life. The final assessment. Dr. Vaughan's committee reached a unanimous conclusion. Humans were simultaneously the most mentally unstable and most mentally resilient species in the galaxy. Their minds were chaos, but functional chaos. They'd evolved consciousness too powerful for their neurology. So their brains had developed workarounds, multiple personalities, flexible memory, recursive thinking, emotional complexity, existential awareness. All of it was adaptation, survival mechanisms, ways to handle consciousness that shouldn't work. The report's final paragraph became famous. Humanity has somehow weaponized mental illness into mental health. What would destroy any other species makes them stronger. They experience more psychological stress in a single day than most species experience in a lifetime. And they call it Tuesday. They are simultaneously broken and unbreakable. We recommend full integration into galactic society, not because they're safe, but because they're inevitable, and trying to stop them would be far more dangerous than accepting them. The Council voted to approve human integration. The vote was 347 for, 2 against, 15 abstentions. The 2 against were telepaths. They were outvoted but noted their objections for the record. You're not ready for what happens when 7 billion of those minds start expanding into the galaxy. We weren't ready for 3 of them. Nobody listened. They should have. 3 years after first contact, humanity joined the Galactic Council. The galaxy adapted. Slowly, reluctantly, with a lot of therapy. New protocols emerged. Safe zones where telepaths could rest from human mental noise. Translation centers staffed with 3-layer teams. Counseling services for aliens experiencing culture shock. Mandatory mental health support for anyone working with humans. The Velhari Communion never fully recovered. They lost their position as diplomatic leaders. Too many of their telepaths couldn't handle human contact. But something interesting happened. The telepaths who survived, who learned to navigate human consciousness. They became the most valuable diplomats in the galaxy. Because if you could understand a human mind, you could understand anything. Advocate Jara became humanity's primary liaison, the same telepath who'd screamed for 6 hours after first contact. She wrote a book. Inside the Storm, a telepath's guide to human consciousness. It became mandatory reading in diplomatic schools. She opened with an acknowledgement. I was broken by human minds. Then I was rebuilt by understanding them. This is my attempt to save you the same trauma. The galaxy learned to work with humans. Mostly. There were incidents. A human diplomat accidentally gave an entire negotiating team intrusive thoughts through proximity to a telepath. A human child's imagination crashed a Velhari meditation session. A human having a bad day transmitted their anxiety to 17 different species simultaneously. But they managed. Because the alternative was leaving humanity alone, and nobody wanted to see what humans would do if left unsupervised. The therapy centers expanded. The translator program grew. The mental stability reports became annual publications. Everyone adapted. And humanity had no idea why everyone else found them so difficult. They were just being themselves. That was the scariest part. Dr. Vastos, the human psychologist who started the Telepathic recovery program, gave a lecture 5 years after first contact. It was broadcast across the galaxy. She stood on stage and said, "You think human minds are chaotic now? Wait until you meet human children. Wait until you experience human creativity, human innovation, human determination. We're not just surviving our own consciousness anymore. We're bringing it to you, and you're going to have to learn to love it. Because we're not changing. We can't change. This is who we are. Beautifully, terrifyingly, impossibly human." The lecture got 40 billion views. Half the comments were from telepaths saying, "Please no." The other half were from humans saying, "You're welcome." The truth about human minds: we're not dangerous because we're aggressive. We're dangerous because we're unpredictable. Even to ourselves, we carry universes in our heads. Competing voices, contradictory desires,